everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film, and this year's podcast media partner for the deadCenter 2022 Film Festival. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we are wrapping up our coverage of the film festival by looking back at the highlights, including some of our favorite films and experiences. So today, I'll be sitting down with the extremely talented team that I had the privilege of working with here at the Cinematropolis. It's a team of 3 writers, and we're going to talk a little bit about the return to the in-person festival experience before swapping notes and talking about some of the films we saw. This is going to be more of a roundtable, less of an interview. So for those of you who have been tuning in to just our deadCenter coverage, this is going to be a little more like my normal show where we're just talking about movies and what we think about them. So joining me today, first up, we have Joe Light, who is contributing to the Cinematropolis for deadCenter and also the managing editor at No Film School. Joe, welcome back to the Cinematic Schematic.
Hi, happy to be here.
All right. And next up, we have, of course, friend and longtime the Cinematropolis contributor, Daniel Bokemper. Daniel, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
And last, but certainly not least, I'm super excited to welcome, a regular of our deadCenter coverage from years past, Christopher Schultz. Chris, welcome back to the Cinematic Schematic.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I should note, this is, I think we skipped a year last year, but I want to say with this specific group, was this the 3rd year I think the 3 of us have worked together? Maybe?
That sounds right.
It sounds right. We had me and Chris and Daniel worked with another gentleman named Kevin Tudor the year for 1 year. So I think, yeah. And then the year before that I was solo. So yeah, 3rd year. Guys, you keep coming back. Thank you. You guys are awesome.
I got nothing better to do. No, I'm just joking.
Oh, man. So listeners, as you can tell, these are some tremendously insightful and awesome writers that I have who are really pitching it at deadCenter every year. You can find all of their deadCenter coverage at the Cinematropolis.com, and you're going to hear us talk about what we saw here in a moment. But before we do get into today's conversation, I just wanted to quickly note that if you're listening to the show and you enjoy our conversation, you can support us by subscribing to the show via your preferred podcast app and leaving us a rating and a review. This is going to be most important, especially on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And subscribing, this is going to be a great way not only to catch up on the 10 or so festival podcast that we just finished, but we've got so many review discussions coming up. Just, off the top of my head, we've got Jurassic World Dominion. Not sure about the movie, but we got a conversation coming. We got Bullet Train. Gosh, we got an Avatar sequel coming out later this year. So if you want to hear our thoughts here at the Cinematropolis on all the new movies, you can subscribe and have them sent straight to your listening device there. Now, without further ado, let's jump into our conversation about the deadCenter 2022 Film Festival. Daniel, my man, you, sir, are the only one in this crew who was actually able to attend in person. No pressure here.
None taken.
For COVID reasons, I was unable to attend. I won't get into the details, but essentially, listeners, I had tested positive right after the Memorial Day weekend, despite being, double boosted with the Pfizer vaccines. And even though I felt great by the time the festival came around, I didn't want to accidentally be the source of other people getting COVID. So, alas, all the coverage you've heard has been done remotely or was done before I had tested positive because I did have a few folks in my studio before then. And then Chris was stayed home for this one, and Joe stayed home for this one. Again, a huge shout out to deadCenter for providing the screener links for us to watch and review these movies. But that leaves us with Mr. Bokemper, who was our eyes and ears on the ground. So, Daniel, thanks for taking one for the team here.
Yeah, of course. It doesn't feel like taking necessarily anything, but it was more personal preference, just wanting to be there, kind of recapture that film festival experience to some extent. And luckily, it was still there. It was different, and even I've been to quite a few films in person as of late, just in general. But a lot of the theaters I tend to gravitate towards, they're still pretty good about creating some form of distance. And even now, people, at least in my experience, aren't. I haven't been to like a packed opening night thing. Maybe like the Batman was close to that, but for the most part, it hasn't been super packed. But regardless, it was really refreshing in a lot of ways. I don't think the weight of a film is always defined by how you view it, as long as you have decent picture, so you can actually see the film, and then decent sound, so you can at least hear what's going on. But I do think when you have a chance to see a film, especially smaller, maybe more independent films like the ones you'll find at deadCenter that you'll likely not see anywhere else, at least for at times years, even if ever at all. It helps like build that kind of sense of reverence and importance to see them in person, at least for me. And so when I do have that opportunity, I like to take it. And it was nice just to experience that again.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I mean, we've all, especially with the pandemic, we've all gotten more accustomed than before to watching stuff at home. But nothing, at least in my mind, this is just my take here. Nothing really replaces that big screen experience. It's really hard. I, for one, get way more distracted when I'm watching things at home versus in a theater. And, there's also the communal experience as well, which is getting together with fellow film lovers to watch a movie that you're really excited about together. Even if it's mostly strangers, people who are really passionate about the thing you're watching, you can feel that energy in the room. So Daniel, I mean, like, would you say at the in-person events that you attended this year, what would you say the energy was like in those screenings?
Excited, ready to be there again. There, and I've kind of experienced that bit of as we slowly have start to enjoy more films in person as a group. I've felt it there, and I feel it here as well. I think there's just just an overall sense of excitement. And just ready to have that spirits again. I will be frank. I've been to more, and I think with good reason, given the current circumstances, I've definitely been to more packed deadCenter screenings before. But that's not to say I don't think it's easy to rate a film festival just by I think how many people attend each individual screening, and I think sometimes people misplace attendance for the quality of a film or maybe even how important it might be. And I would say for the people that were attending there, there was plenty of questions asked. I didn't always get to enjoy like a Q&A with every screening I went to, but when they were there, such as for Mama Bears, people were very involved and just very excited to be there and ask questions. And so maybe this is more of a I've had some time away and haven't gotten to experience that setting again, and so I'm just kind of over the moon to be there. I do think that there is something different. I do definitely think it's that the film festival experience in Oklahoma City was missed, and it's nice to be able to slowly and gradually reintroduce that.
Awesome. And I mean, we're going to talk more specifically about the movies in and out here in a moment. What screenings did you attend? I mean, in types of variety, and how many of those had Q&As, would you say?
Right. So 2 of them for certain had Q&As. I attended 5 screenings in person total. I didn't go to any public screenings, did not make it out to Magic Mike, but I will rewatch it and its sequel in solidarity sometime soon. But
10 years of Magic Mike.
No, 10 years. I'll need to catch
Where's my Legacy sequel? I need it right now.
Honestly, yeah, I'm still baffled that Magic Mike came out 10 years ago. I'm having I can't compute it. I didn't go to any of the public screenings, but I did make it out to Eternal Spring, The Braves, Octopus, and then those that actually had screenings behind them. It was Mama Bears and the Tearjerker shorts. I do want to give a shout out to 2 of the feature programmers. I believe it was Kevin Ely and Sunrise Tipiconi for just really solid, concise introductions to the films that really set the tone. So even for the films that didn't benefit from a Q&A or a panel of any kind, it was still nice to have them introduce it.
Again, tremendous shout out to all of the programmers who really put in the work at this year's festival. Kevin Ely, Sunrise Tipiconi, Camila Chavez Rojas, we've got LaRon Chapman for Pride, Paris Burris for Shorts. I mean, just awesome team putting in the work this year. Daniel, is there any other highlights about the in-person experience that you want to share with us today?
Beyond that, just a solid festival. Again, I'm always excited to see where deadCenter will go from here, and going to challenge myself to actually go to more panels moving forward, maybe next year. Try and actually go to more panels rather than just screenings themselves.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, we should note that they have a lot of panels that are put on by the Oklahoma Film and Music Office. Just talking about the ins and outs of filmmaking here in Oklahoma. Again, I don't know. I'm one of those guys. I'm a sucker for panels. Like when you go to cons and stuff and people are all like lining up for autographs, which is cool. But I'm always like, yeah, but I just want to hear people talk about cool stuff they made. And
Oh yeah.
so I'm a big sucker for that. So I did miss out on attending those this year. Let's get really to the core of deadCenter here. Let's talk about the movies. And guys, we saw so many movies. Among this team here, I think we have at least 14 movies that are being reviewed. And then I think I had around 8 filmmakers that I interviewed as part of the festival. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. I believe there was over 140 films, either feature films or short films that played at this year's festival. But I'm actually going to start just with the Oklahoma feature films. And Chris, I actually want to turn to you for this one. Of course, as I noted a moment ago, due to circumstances, both you and I, we had to do deadCenter from home. But you covered several movies for us, including the 3 Oklahoma feature films this year, and actually wrote a really insightful essay, I would say, kind of analyzing, what are these 3 films coming out together? What are they saying about sort of the state of Oklahoma in 2022? I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about each of these films, and we'll start with Chicken House. So what exactly can you tell us about Chicken House, and what did you think of the film?
So Chicken House is the second feature film from Kate Jones. She previously did She's the Eldest, which I think was 2 years ago. It premiered at deadCenter. And it's basically just kind of an examination of trying to make it as an actor here in Oklahoma as well as in Los Angeles. And it centers around 4 women who live in a house together. One of the roommates moves to Los Angeles to try to make it out there and is replaced by this sort of, I don't know, sketchy, questionable type person, I guess. And they're not really sure about her past, where she's come from. This is a character named Kat, played by Kate Jones as well. It's got a really great cast overall. It's really just kind of an offbeat comedy. I note in my essay, but the character Kat name checks David Lynch and Phoebe Waller-Bridge's at some point at near the end of the film. And I think that's a pretty good sort of combination of like, if someone were to ask, what filmmakers do you think like most influenced this? I would probably say those 2. It's got the humor that Waller-Bridges is known for, but just kind of that Lynch weirdness as well. So overall, a really, really solid, enjoyable film. I liked quite a bit about it. I won't go into too much detail, I guess, just because it was kind of fun just going into it completely blind. I had no idea what it was going to be about beforehand.
No, that's really great, and I think with Kate's work, I'm always curious, especially when I saw the trailer. I think there's a short trailer floating around out there, and that's where you're like, oh, I'm intrigued. That's about all I want to know about the film, though, because it really is sort of an experience, I would say. I found that to be pretty funny myself. But Joe, I actually want to turn it to you here because you actually reviewed Chicken House for us, and one thing I noticed when I was reading your review was that you got to, in quote, got to see it move from the page to the screen. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. Can you tell me a little bit more about your relationship with the film?
Yeah, I actually am in a writing group with Kate. She is awesome. And this was one of the scripts that she brought to the group. So I got to see some very early drafts of it. And I don't know if anyone has ever read any of her scripts, but she writes very specifically in the way that she wants it to look. Like you can tell very clearly it's not necessarily traditional writing because she just jumps around so much. Like if you see just like the first 5 minutes of the film, you know that she's jumping between worlds, times, characters, styles. And so it's really interesting to see her do that initially and then know exactly what the vision is and be able to translate it so well into the finished product. So that's what I was talking about there, just seeing, especially knowing that they shot this so fast and for so little money. The fact that she was able to translate it that well is just really, really impressive to me.
Yeah, I mean, again, overall, it's when you mentioned the budget, this is a micro-budgeted film, and not only that, I would say I had the privilege of interviewing Kate and Cassie on the podcast, related to the film, and they were talking about their experiences and some of the challenges they faced. But it really sounds like not only did Kate have very specific ideas from the scene to scene, but she did a lot of like on-set directing for her actors, which was, really impressive because she was doing like 8 jobs at once. Probably she wrote the script, she was the director, she was co-producing it. She was wearing a lot of hats all at once, and for her to get these types of performances out of her cast, all while making them feel really good, like Cassie. Just spoke very highly of her experience and even getting a word in from Mickey Reese off mic, hearing about his experience there. I mean, it just sounds like it was a really great film to work on, despite the fact having a very low budget. Seems like she did a tremendous job, not only making a great movie, but making a great experience for a cast. So what would happen if we gave her some budget? I don't know.
I don't know. Hello.
Well, hey, thanks for sharing a little bit more about your experience, with the script. Is there anything else you'd like to add about Chicken House before we move on?
Like I said, it didn't really honestly change that much. I could tell that they were probably experimenting a little on set. There are some different things, but overall, she knew what she wanted. She developed that script over a long enough period that she was able to get that done exactly the way that she wanted to, again, even though it was quickly and very cheaply done, and it's just very commendable. So I respect her so much for that work.
So that is our first Oklahoma feature that we're talking about. That's Kate Jones's Chicken House. Next up is the winner of the Best Oklahoma Feature, Out of Exile. Chris, what can you tell us about Out of Exile?
So Out of Exile is kind of a very bleak, I would say, dramatic thriller, a thriller / familial drama, which basically starts off with a armed car robbery, and it's an armed car robbery that goes south very quickly, and it's just kind of dealing with the repercussions of this crime. And kind of exploring how these criminals are trying to find a better life, but kind of just continually getting sucked back into this sort of violent life that they live. It's a pretty well-made film, I think, overall. It plot-wise, I think, you're not necessarily going to see something groundbreaking per se when it comes to the story, but it is compelling. It's very well acted, and it's told very well and shot very well too. Charles Elmore, a local cinematographer, was responsible for shooting this and did a really fantastic job.
Yeah, the production values on this one looked really slick. I was most impressed with how they integrated the drone footage pretty seamlessly. It really kind of captured this kind of dark and gritty Oklahoma. Even though the film is not officially set in Oklahoma, I think they kind of leave it a little nebulous in terms of like where it's set at. But you get little, we're from here, so we know kind of what it looks like. They were able to get some really interesting shots where you're like, oh wow, it feels gross to live here all of a sudden. But it has that kind of gritty crime drama look to it.
There were definitely times where it felt like it was sort of shot in LA, some of these different locations that they found, and just the cinematography, again, just kind of utilizing that to make it have that kind of look of like maybe a larger, more sprawling city than Oklahoma City in fact is, and at least, in comparison to LA, for instance. So yeah, they did a good job of sort of hiding the football in terms of where this was actually set.
Right. We know that Ryan Merriman's from Dallas, I think. He's at least working for the Dallas arm of the FBI, I think.
Yeah. They showed the exterior of the FBI, and it is like the Dallas, Texas, like FBI location. So at least he's from there, but he has a line at some point about like, get these dirty criminals out of my city or something like that. So it's like, well, is it Dallas? Is it is it OKC?
Oklahoma City? Yeah. Again, left a little up to the imagination. But no, I had so this is I think I don't want to say not directorial debut, but I think maybe narrative debut for director Kyle Kawika Harris. Tremendous filmmaker. Seems like there's a lot of promise there. He previously had won a regional Emmy for the documentary about the pipeline, I believe. So again, a lot of promise there, and like you said, tremendous performances. You've got Adam Hampton up there, who's always kind of like one of Oklahoma's like sort of local gems in terms of acting. But and Ryan Merriman, of course, previous Dead Center icons. So tremendous cast there. We had a great conversation with the director and several members of the cast that you can listeners can find over at the Cinematropolis.com. But yeah, I don't want to reiterate on too many other things you said, Chris. So I just want to ask. This is best, as I said a minute ago, best Oklahoma feature film, as selected by the Oklahoma Film Critics Circle, which both Chris and I are members of. So again, congratulations to the Out of Exile team. Chris, anything else you want to add about this film?
No, I think that pretty well covers it. Yeah, pretty solid debut feature. I think there's a lot to look forward to.
Awesome. Well, let's take us to the last Oklahoma feature here. So it's 10 Killer. So can you tell us about 10 Killer and what maybe made it a more interesting addition this year?
10 Killer is really, I always kind of hate to use the term slice of life, but in a lot of ways that's what this film is. It's very kind of, it doesn't have much of a plot, really. There's not really much of a story going on. It's just kind of drifting through these lives of these people. It was shot in and around the Tahlequah area. So there's a lot of attention to sort of like the poverty in the area. Again, looking at sort of like the violence that's going on in the area, the crime, and how a lot of people in this area will tend to kind of turn to crime to sort of make ends meet. But yeah, I felt like the kind of the sort of drifting nature of the storytelling was suitable to the subject matter. We see a lot of, in between just sort of the major things happening, the sort of main plot of it is this 18-year-old kid who works at a machine parts factory, just kind of runs afoul of his mom's boyfriend, who is also a coworker at the machine factory. And so he's kind of hiding out from him for a little bit because he knows the guy's coming like out to get him, coming after him. There's another subplot about the mother wanting to take his little brother away and move away with this man. And so that's kind of where the most of the drama kind of centers around. But for the most part, there's just kind of, they're hanging out at the convenience store. They're going to the lake. It's just kind of what these people get up to on a day-to-day basis. And so I thought it was interesting in that way that it was saying a lot without really just sort of like saying something, you know what I mean? It wasn't sort of, there wasn't just like a big message, in red letters on the screen. It just kind of took its time telling its story in its own way. So.
Yeah, a little bit of slice of life, though. I mean, I think so it sounds like it was really just trying to tell you a little bit more about the way people are living, right? At least that was my take. It's not really trying to communicate some profound message per se, as much as it's like, here's what people who live here live like and with the day-to-day and the dramas they face.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and Chris, I don't want to spoil it, but as I mentioned earlier, you wrote a really awesome analysis of the 3 different Oklahoma feature films. Anything you want to say about that to our listeners before we move on?
Just in brief, I think there's a lot of connective tissue between these films that you might not immediately think about because they are 3 very different films. Chicken House is primarily utilizing comedy. 10 Killer's a little more sort of a serial comic drama, and then Out of Exile is full on drama. But despite that, they are really kind of saying a lot about not only what it's like living in Oklahoma, but the rest of the United States and perhaps globally as well. So read the essay and find out more.
Awesome. And listeners, of course, everything that we covered that is going to be linked in the show notes today. So essays, podcast interviews, all of our collective work linked in the show notes for today's episode. So if you want to read that, check out the show notes. You can find a link to Chris's essay on the 3 Oklahoma feature films. Now, Chris, you also caught one of the more competitive blocks of short films, the Okie Shorts Volume 1 and 2. It's so competitive they had to actually create more slots so they could break it into 2 blocks, Volume 1 and Volume 2. What was your take on this year's lineup of short films?
It was a really great lineup. The level of just diverse voices coming into this was really impressive. And again, same with the features, but times 1,000. The variety of different film languages, different approaches to storytelling, be it comedy, horror, documentary, straight up drama. there was just a lot. There was a lot to really kind of sink your teeth into. So I think I've watched Oklahoma Shorts in the past. I feel like this is maybe the richest lineup of films that we've had so far. So yeah, really, really, really solid all around. I didn't really see anything that was just absolutely terrible. So.
Yeah. It's a competitive block for sure. I know. I mean, the number of films that the programmers review every year is significantly more than the 20 that got in. I'll put it that way. So they really are picking from the cream of the crop. And I think in terms of like looking at up and coming talent or what talent is available here in Oklahoma, I really do feel like the shorts block is the best place to look because at that, you have a more controlled budget at that point. Filmmakers feeling a little more experimental and willing to take risks because it's a smaller project. And I always just feel like the shorts deliver big time. Now, was there 2 or 3 of those shorts at all you wanted to call out?
Yeah, and I'll say 2 very quickly. Because the ones that I wanted to mention specifically don't all fit into this bucket, but so many young filmmakers, like maybe high school level or just out of high school, were contributing this year, which is really awesome to see. So one in particular, made by a younger filmmaker, was called "The First 280 Honest Words of My Life." This was just a very strange, but charming short, featuring a girl that's just kind of telling her story, and she's kind of bouncing back and forth between thoughts. It's kind of freeform, almost stream of consciousness at times, but it's shot in this very kind of lo-fi 8mm style. I think maybe they were using like an 8mm app or something like that, but it looked really cool. And yeah, it was an odd film, and I just really enjoyed everything about it. It's sort of hard to explain what it's about. I think what I said is about the gist of it. She's just kind of telling a story and telling some of her thoughts to us, and it's intercut with different shots of her sort of acting these things out with other people, or sometimes representing them in some more physical way that's not maybe direct.
The title one more time?
Yeah, sure. It's called "The First 280 Honest Words of My Life."
Listeners, check it out. Look it up. I'll make sure to link to at least the IMDb page in the show notes. Chris, so you said there's another one that stood out to you?
Yeah, there were a few documentaries from Native Voices too. One that I particularly loved was called "What They've Been Taught," which was just, again, it kind of just had a narration with shots of different locations around Oklahoma, as well as, I believe, North Carolina. It was made by a Cherokee filmmaker. And again, it's just kind of talking about these different ways of doing, of living one's life, and how that knowledge is being passed on to different generations. It kind of focuses on a mask maker, and so you kind of go visually, you see the process of him constructing this mask from a tree that he has chopped down. They go into like giving thanks to the tree as for its sacrifice to making something. And that was kind of the general idea, is that you are not creating something, you're making something from something else. So kind of taking away this idea of, soul creation, and looking at all the myriad, things and even people that go into creating something. Just very beautiful short film. I think it was maybe about 11 minutes long. And I really enjoyed that one quite a bit. And again, that one is called "What They've Been Taught."
Awesome. Well, thanks for shouting those out. And of course, I also want to call out the winner of the Best Okie Short this year, as selected by the Oklahoma Film Critics Circle, was Old House, New Home, which is a story documenting sort of, I think, the remodeling of the outsider's home if I understand correctly. Haven't seen it myself. Heard great things though. So check that one out as well. Let's move on to documentaries here. Daniel, you are our documentary guy. Not only were you the feet on the ground, our eyes and ears, but you also covered largely documentaries, not exclusively, including the opening night film and the winner of Best Pride Film, Mama Bears. Could you tell us a little bit more about Mama Bears?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very powerful documentary from Darisha Kai. Quick shout out to Caleb's interview on the Cinematic Schematic with Darisha. Listen for more insight about the film. But again, the film itself follows three Christian women, two who are white conservative mothers who are reconciling their faith with really just being there, being supportive of their gay and trans children. Whereas Tammy, the film's third subject, she is a black lesbian who is a very firm Christian, but also trying to, be who she actually is, and goes to great lengths to sort of deny herself her identity. And the film follows her relationship with her mother and her relationship with her faith as she slowly begins to accept who she is. It's heart-wrenching, excuse me, but also it reminds us of how painful and backwards sometimes our society, mostly our legislature, for being real, can be. So a lot of the film focuses on Kimberly. The film has features two other women, Sarah Cunningham, who's from Oklahoma, and her son, Parker, who came out, I believe when he was either in junior high or high school, and the years of tension that between him and his mother before she finally decided that, I can be both a Christian and support my son and be open about it, which led her to find a movement here, Free Mom Hugs, which we'll go into a bit more detail in a second. But it also follows Kimberly Shafley and her daughter, Kai, who was assigned male at birth, but came out as trans at 2.5 years old. And I think that's very, very, very important. And just a reminder that, you don't choose to be trans, of course. It's never an option for anyone. It's natural. It's just life. And yet we do have legislators who are very convinced that trans people are just, men or women who want to go into a different bathroom for some reason and assault people.
Point out it's in Texas.
It is in Texas, yeah. And the bill, just to give a little more context, the bill I'm referring to was probably I want to say it was 2018, 2019, but it's still, you still hear about them today. I know Indiana had its own form of one, but it was Dan Patrick who was really spearheading this really dumb push, but it was gaining a lot of traction because it was built on fear. And ultimately the victim of this wasn't just adults who are trans, but also a child. One of the stories of Kai, this little girl who was just trying to go to the bathroom and was forced to ultimately have an accident in the middle of a hallway because the principals couldn't figure out, well, she can't go into the or she can't go into the girls' bathroom because that's against the law, but she can't go into the boys' bathroom because she's clearly a girl. So we're going to let her use the nurse's bathroom. But, oh, wait, there's only one nurse's bathroom in this elementary school and the nurse is in there. So I guess you're going to have to just humiliate yourself. And it really captures that trauma. And I think one of the most sobering reminders of this film is, even if you are an ally, which I'd hope many of us are, if not living through it to some extent ourselves, we still don't. It's hard to sometimes internalize just how hard it is to live with who you are sometimes. And I think the film really captures that in a very moving and a very touching way, but it's not all pessimistic, even though it's real. There's definitely Kimberly and Kai relocated to Austin, one of the most expensive places to live in America, just to be somewhere in their state that accepts them for who they are. One of the most powerful things, and one of the recurring images, is at the start of the film, you see a kind of a montage of both Sarah and Kimberly, but I think it's mostly Kimberly, all of her family photos. And you see a lot of shots of family reunions, and virtually every face, except for hers and Kai's, and some of the other children, it's blurred out because they could not get permission from any of Kimberly's family to be featured in this film. For Tammy, her mom is featured throughout the first half of the film in interviews about, not really approving of her daughter's lifestyle, but loving her anyway. And then she leaves the documentary halfway through it because it was hard for her to cope between the pressures of her family and her church just for supporting her daughter. And even so, all of these bad things happen. Though what I think is the triumph that this film also conveys is that they still hold hope. They don't hate anybody. They don't resent their family. There's just this hope that inevitably people learn, and it's important to remember that. But at the same time, it's also important to check our privilege, and even when we are supportive, know that we still need to meditate on how we don't have to endure it quite as these people do. And I don't know, it's just very, very well made, asking questions at every corner, and just incredibly thoughtful. And you see some very, very, very organic interviews, and every 10 minutes it'll have you on the verge of tears. So very moving stuff.
One thing I want to highlight, though, is the movie, despite wrestling with some really intense and upsetting and disappointing stories, just based on the world we live in, it is ultimately very optimistic. As you said, there's
Yes.
people all hold out hope. They talk about free mom hugs. Free mom hugs, is really a grassroots movement. I didn't even realize this until I was in the interview with Darisha. Like, they have chapters in all 50 states. There's over 20,000 members via the main Facebook group.
Yeah. Just a point of, and I'm so sorry, just a point of clarification. I believe it's Mama Bears, the organization. Free Mom Hugs is kind of it's like a subsidiary is probably not the right word, but it's Sarah Cunningham did not find Mama Bears.
Sarah Cunningham was the founder of Free Mom Hugs.
Yes.
And they have chapters in all 50 states. And there's over 20,000 members via Facebook group. That I learned it in the interview. So anyway, just there's a lot of growth, it seems. And the other thing that's I kind of took away from the interview, which listeners can check out, Darisha was just talking about how, even LGBTQ plus families, when someone comes out, they have to have, though it might not seem unfair, there has to be a certain amount of empathy to give the families time to accept, because, she basically was like, hey, it took me 5, 10, 15, 20 years to accept who I am. Why should I expect my parents to do it like overnight? And that was it was a really interesting way to frame it, and something I hadn't considered, because the movie, at the end of the day, like you said, they don't hate anybody. Everything is framed in a more positive light. Even the clear evils that are oppressing these people are framed from a place of misunderstanding.
Yes.
So again, just tremendous film. I was very moved. And speaking of Sarah Cunningham, did she attend the screening that you were at, Daniel?
Yeah, she did. She was there with her son, Parker, who's also featured heavily throughout the film. She spoke a bit about the mission of Free Mom Hugs, which, for those of you who don't know, it's a movement you often will find them at pride parades and pride festivals. And they're just people who say, they might be wearing a shirt that says Free Mom Hugs. And if you need a hug, they're there for you. I've received many myself throughout the years, and it's just kind of heartwarming to see that. But another thing she mentioned, which isn't covered quite as much in the film itself, but it is alluded to, and I cannot think of the movement's name. I think it might be like Substitute Mom or Stand-In, but either way, it is something that Sarah does, where she will, if a gay couple is getting married, one, if not both sets of parents may not be there, for whatever reason, And Sarah and members of the stand-in movement will opt to substitute and be there in place, of the couple's parents, which again is very necessary. What ultimately what Sarah is spreading is support, and I think it's very important that she does that without ever really revoking her faith. I think that's pretty moving that she's actually found a path to reconciliation, it's easy to look at these as bilateral, as either you either are an ally to the LGBTQ plus community, or you're sticking to your faith, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a choice. You can have both, and that's at the heart of both this film, but also Sarah's messaging at the end of the film.
Yep. Yeah, it was great stuff. Well, that was Mama Bears. Again, it was the opening night film and the winner of the Best Pride Feature Film. And have an interview with the film's director. I say great. She was great. I was moved during the interview. So I don't. So with that said, Daniel, you also covered Eternal Spring and called. You said it was in a category of its own, but it still feels at place among many of the most important documentaries. So could you tell me a little bit more about what was the subject and how do you think it separated itself from other documentaries you saw this year?
Yes, and this was the it should be worth noting this was the winner, whereas Mama Bears was the winner of the Best Pride Feature. This won the Best Documentary Feature. It is about the religious suppression of the movement Falun Gong, which is it's practiced in many countries, but originated in China. It's takes many of the practices of Buddhism, but I don't think it actually claims that it's like a subsection of Buddhism. It just shares a lot of similarities. But more importantly, the hijacking that occurred in 2002 of state-run television, specifically state-run television propaganda that is very anti-religious practice, and how a small group of Falun Gong practitioners both successfully carried out their underground broadcast, but also many of them were captured and very few survived. Some are even imprisoned to this day, and it happened in 2002. On the flip side, it also follows it's both mostly animated with the art and spoken through deadCenter, who is a Canadian Chinese comic book illustrator who was also, I don't know if he actively practices, but he was a follower of Falun Gong until that hijacking. He was living in, I believe it's Changchun City. And shortly after that broadcast occurred, the police went on a very vicious manhunt for everyone who's involved. And one of the things that's said very early in the film is that the police will kill 1,000 people in order to find one person that was allegedly responsible for something. And so out of that fear, deadCenter moves. He migrates to North America. He goes to New York first, but he now lives in Canada. And he had this resentment for members of, the religion he practiced, because he felt the hijacking just intensified the persecution. And he isn't wrong. But where he admits that he was incorrect was that he didn't empathize with them. He felt like it was done for no reason. It was careless. And he travels to Seoul to meet one of the participants in the hijacking by the name of Mr. White, who managed to survive and still practices Falun Gong today. And over the course of that conversation with other survivors, he learns to, truly empathize and sort of like finds himself once again. It's where it's different and what separates it from other documentaries is it's almost entirely animated. So it's very similar to the one I think of as like it's almost like a combination of Waltz with Bashir, which I believe is a documentary from 2006 about, and it is entirely animated, about conflict in Lebanon, and then Joshua Oppenheimer's The Look of Silence, which is about the Cambodian genocide and involves a survivor of this genocide speaking with those who carried it out. And while we don't hear from the Chinese government on their stance on this whole thing. We do hear from stories from the survivors, and the thing is, there isn't really a lot of, because of the nature of China, there isn't a lot of footage of torture, of the brutality that took place. So instead, Daxong recreates it, and that's what literally animates a lot of the film, and it's just a striking visual style. If you've ever read a lot of recent like Justice League comics and then some Star Wars comics as well, Daxong has been that's where he's garnered a lot of his fame and critical acclaim for his work. But it's just a very beautiful piece, and honestly, it actually does small things that just make the documentary better to follow, because there's about 8 interviews happening simultaneously. And it almost feels like a video game in a lot of ways, in which not to say it, and I don't mean that to downplay it, but they like use his illustrations as a way to, signify who's speaking. So you can very easily follow along, and it really builds up the character. Even 2 of the main characters, a grain worker named Big Truck, who's this massive, almost literal mountain of a man, who was very, very, very pivotal to the movement and to this hijacking. He and an engineer, I believe Lang, were both, they died by 2006 in imprisonment from just being years of torture after this all transpired. But you still get them, you still get their spirit, you still hear their story, and it's just it's very moving. I don't know if this film, how prolific it's going to be, but I really hope it finds its way onto a bigger stage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with sort of the critical acclaim that I think, it's gotten, at least at deadCenter, hopefully we'll have a chance to see it, because I haven't seen that film, but you definitely sold me on it. Well, Daniel, just really quickly here, before we move on, were there any other films you want to give a quick shout out to?
Yeah, just 2. And real briefly, I want to mention Octopus, another documentary I caught that is a very contemplative look at the days that immediately follow the Beirut explosion that occurred in August 2020. I think we here in the West, it was kind of only on our minds maybe for a couple days at most, when it was covered by news outlets, and then we didn't hear from it anymore. But this film, there's no interviews, there's no voiceover, there's no narration, there's no animation, there's nothing. It's just almost these static looks at. I don't want to say static, but I should say maybe these like unblinking looks. Just the camera just sits there and it observes life in Beirut in the days immediately following the explosion. And it's very beautiful, very contemplative. I would compare it to something like the documentary from 2011, Sam Sarah, or maybe even a documentary from 2012 about the North American fishing industry, Leviathan. Kind of finds its company there. And then I won't go too much on this film, even though I really want to, but the one, the narrative feature I caught, which was The Braves, which won the best narrative feature. It's a French film with 2 powerful performances. My essay's up on it now. I won't reiterate it here. But again, another very, 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 very powerful film.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for giving us the rundown of the documentaries and the other films you saw. Again, I wish I could catch more documentaries. I did see Mama Bears, and just want to iterate what you said. It was a very, I think I at least cried 3 different times. So that's a must see and one to keep up with as well. Joe, let's bring you in here, because you were really our Swiss Army knife of the team this year, because you didn't just cover like one, genre. You really did a variety. I mean, you did short films like Mantis Club. You did a comedy, Wake Up Leonard. You did the Mexican drama, Oliver in the Pool. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the movies you saw. So let's maybe start with Mantis Club. The premise for this sounded really intriguing. What about it stood out to you?
Yeah, these are not nearly as probably serious as Daniel's movies. So it's hard to follow such powerful projects. But Mantis Club was very fun. It was a short by Yalian Lee, and I believe it was her graduate thesis from this year. So recently done, and also just from school. So that's just amazing. It was amazing work. But the basic premise of it was, what if in a different world, a different reality, women were predatory in the same way that, well, not the same way, but a similar way that some men are in our current reality. But in this reality, it's basically, if you have sex with a woman, there's an 85% chance that she will kill and eat you, basically, just like praying mantises do. So that is the setup. The character you follow is a young virgin, Zach, who is talking with this older woman online and trying to decide if he's going to go out to dinner with her and if he's willing to risk it. And it's just a very smart short film, not too didactic, doesn't get very on the nose just because it's all comedic. It's just, you hear the same things that you might hear women say to each other or femme people say to each other, just like, oh, maybe she's one of the good ones, or she's just looking for fresh meat. Do I want to take the risk just for love? And then you hear women in this world saying like, oh, I just want to kiss, and then just pushing and pushing further, and eventually leading to, horror. So it's just a really fun little horror film. And the direction was really strong, as I said, and it looked great. So I think if this filmmaker is doing this early in her career, I think she could easily move on to do some really, really fun horror projects. And I'm really excited to see what she does next.
Awesome. I'm all for comedies that are deconstructing the patriarchy. Tear it down, I say. I want to see more.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. But like I said, it wasn't condescending in any way. It was just more fun. And oh, yep, that's the reality that we're living in. So let's just all laugh at it.
Yeah, no, that's good though, because I think that's the sort of the risk you lay in those types of stories, is getting a little too on the nose. So again, super excited to hear that it played out in comedic fashion. Let's move on to something maybe a little more serious here. I mean, you had Oliver and the Pool, which is the Mexican film here. What can you tell us about this film?
Yeah, that one was also a little bit comedic, a little bit fanciful, because it's told from the perspective of a child named Oliver. Basic premise of this one is Oliver's parents, who basically just go by mother and father for most of the film, are splitting up. She has fallen in love with somebody at her therapy office, and over dinner, they tell Oliver that they are splitting up. Literally seconds later, his father keels over and dies. And so the rest of the film is Oliver coping with that loss, figuring out how to move forward, because he learns that his father died from an aneurysm. He learns what an aneurysm is, that it's something that is hidden in a body and can strike anytime. So his basic reaction is to say to himself, well, what's the point of even trying? Because I could just die at any point like my father did. So what he does is he sets up next to the pool at his house and stays there. He says, I don't move from right here. Friends try to come over and get him to go play. His uncle comes over and tries to get him to be consoled and move on. The mother is more frustrated most of the film. She, as a therapist, is very no nonsense and just wants him to get over it, basically, go to school, because she's ready to move on. So it's basically all these characters trying to cope with this loss in different ways. And a few little misadventures happening throughout the course of the film as they all are dealing with that grief. I did, as I said in my review, it's up, I believe, already, really like it. And as I also said just now, it is a little bit fanciful. He has these dream sequences where he sees his father appear to him. He dreams that he kills his mother's new lover, which is apparently a shared fantasy somehow. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but in this universe, the lover and Oliver have the same dream. So there are little sort of fantasy moments sprinkled in there too, with animation. The house gets infested with cockroaches, which are also animated. So that's kind of fun too. Well, funny to see, not fun for the characters. But yeah, it's a cute little film. It sort of, I think my one critique of the film is that those fantasy elements do seem a little bit unfocused, and it does sort of peter out because the characters are really not going anywhere. They're at this house, Oliver's by the pool. You sort of have to find new ways to inject drama and get them doing things, even though he refuses to move from a chair. So it kind of goes off the rails in a couple of places that feel disconnected. But overall, a very cute film and a very interesting exploration of loss and grief and how a child might view the situation and deal with it in a very unique way.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot to love there, even if maybe what's the saying? The sum is not as great as its parts, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's Oliver in the Pool. You really piqued my interest when you selected the film, and I was reading your review. I was like, hey, I'm at least curious, so I'm gonna keep my eyes open for that one to see where it goes post festival. And last but certainly not least, you reviewed Wake Up Leonard, and you said in your review, because Leonard is so aimless, unfortunately, the story can be at times. So could you tell me a little more about your thoughts here? What did you think of the indie comedy and what worked and what didn't?
Yeah, and I actually did really like this film. I think as I have lived in LA previously, a lot of it felt very familiar to me. It's this character in Los Angeles or suburbs of Los Angeles who is moving apartments, which is already a nightmare regardless of where you are, and gets contacted by an ex. The ex wants to tell him something. He realizes that maybe it's a chance to reconnect with this ex. So he spends the entire day just very stressed out. He visits his healer for an extended meditation, which turns into another dream sequence on a beach. I am actually talking to the director of this film, so hopefully I will have some more insight later this week. But apparently it was a lot of improvisation on this film, so I don't know how much of a script or an outline they had. And that's kind of the sense that you get at points, just that he's kind of wandering around. They shot, again, I'm assuming this, but I assume they shot this with no permits. It's a lot of in cars, in alleys, in apartments, and that's just what you have to do in LA because permits are crazy expensive. And I really respect that because I have done that. I've had friends that do that in LA, so I respect them working with what they had. But there are scenes that I think they barely scratch 70 minutes, I think, in this film, and you can kind of feel them reaching for that at points. They just let scenes kind of go on. It's a problem that you see in a lot of like recent comedies where there's improv and nobody knows when to stop their actors. So I think that's probably the flaw there, is just that they are trying to reach a certain like film length, air quotes, and they just sort of let the characters go on in bits that don't always land. They're strong as they start, but they don't know when to cut. So those scenes just kind of fill space. You can maybe see the director maybe trying to stretch the scenes a little bit. But all that being said, I did really like this movie. It's a gay lead character. It's an LGBTQ positive film. It also, in a way that's similar to Mantis Club, isn't ever condescending about those sort of like crunchy granola, new agey things that are so prominent in Los Angeles. It is very earnest in the way this character is choosing to deal with his problems, which is, again, going to a meditation or saying affirmations every time he gets into his vehicle. Just trying in whatever way he can to keep his head above water and deal with the emotional stress that he's going through on this particular day, which also happens to be right before Christmas. So that is also a very unique feeling in LA, the holidays. It's not, LA is already so like detached from a lot of reality. I feel like that when it gets to the holiday times, it's hot, not everybody decorates. So it's already kind of a weird like middle space to exist in. So that was also interesting. I thought a good choice for this film, just a lot of like being in the middle of things that are familiar and unfamiliar. So I really like the film. I'm just being nitpicky, I think.
Yeah, a little bit of criticism there. I mean, so would you say this is a movie I need to add to my list of Christmas movies to watch this year? That's what I just heard.
Yeah, go for it. I think it's a really cute Christmas film. It's an LA Christmas film, so it's like, again, you'll see characters putting trees up, but it's not like a very holiday cheer movie.
Awesome. Well, hey, Joe, thanks for giving us a rundown of what you saw. Was there any other films or any other comments you wanted to make about things you saw?
No, I think just overall, if you can get a hand on any of these films, do see them, because I think the deadCenter is, in particular, a really good festival to showcase films that might not be seen for a very long time. Not to say that none of these films will get distribution. It's just a very good platform to showcase up and coming talent. And if you hear especially about a short that you really, really like, try to find it immediately, because those vanish in like seconds, and you might never see them again. So just shout out to deadCenter for being a good platform.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't know, you know what? I just realized I don't think I noted this in any of our coverage this year. This is our deadCenter's first year being an Oscar qualifying film festival. So again, I think it just speaks to they're providing a platform for a lot of these filmmakers who might not have a platform otherwise, and they could also technically qualify for Oscar short films in particular. So again, Joe, I'm really glad that you called that out. It is a great place to find some tremendous talent up and coming, and it's always fun when you discover like a really talented filmmaker in the shorts block, and then 5, 6, 7 years later, you see they make a feature film that turns out to be really good too. So yeah. Great call out there. All right, Chris. So last thing I want to call out here. So unfortunately, since me, you and Joe were unable to go to the festival, and Daniel really had his hands full with all the documentaries, we did not get to go to any of the deadCenter films in person, which is a huge bummer, because I think Mickey Reese worked really hard to put together some tremendous programming for that film. That said, you did get a chance to screen one of the films from your home, Piggy. Could you tell us a bit more about that film and maybe what separates that from traditional deadCenter programming?
Yeah, so just a little bit more about the film. It is actually a feature length film adapted from a short film that came out, I think, in 2018. So this is the extended version, the extended cut, if you will, and it was made in Brazil, I believe. I would need to double check that, yeah, it's the basic plot is there is a young girl, teenage girl, who is bullied by some of her peers. They call her Piggy. Because she is overweight, and she ends up witnessing them being kidnapped and basically dragged away by a serial killer, and she doesn't really do anything to stop him from taking them. And so it kind of goes from there in terms of what it. The repercussions of her inactivity as the sort of investigation as to where these girls have gone ensues within the town. Yes, Caleb, thank you. Spain. I was thinking of a different film that was in Brazil. So thank you for that clarification. But yeah, it's a pretty solid horror film. It really kind of plays into, how people can become kind of morally dubious when they're faced with bullying, and what they may or may not do to see those bullies get their comeuppance. So lots of shades of Carrie, I would say, kind of leads to some pretty bloody places, and that's all I'll say of where it goes.
I'm glad you mentioned the Carrie comparison there. Mickey said the same thing when I talked to him on the podcast about deadCenter. So it sounds like if you're a Carrie or a horror fan, this is one to check out. Would you recommend?
Yeah, for sure. And it's got a lot to say about like fat phobia. That's been happening a lot. The nature of bullying. There's a lot going on sort of under the hood of this film. It's beautifully shot as well. It has kind of a sort of a brighter pastel almost color palette to it, so that really kind of contrasts well with the horrible and dark things that are happening in the narrative. But yeah, I would have to say check it out. I mentioned to Daniel how I wasn't sure if I liked the ending, but I've thought about it a little longer, and I do. So
that's always good to hear. Well, and here's the other thing that, and me and Mickey talked about this after in the interview that people can listen to if they want to hear just Mickey talking. I I think the thing that really intrigued me most about this entire block, and I was super bummed I didn't get to make it out to any of these sort of midnight movie style screenings. I would say provocative in some ways, and what I mean is you're probably going to walk away thinking about the movie for one reason or another after it's done. So I'm very happy to hear that Piggy did that as well. So fingers crossed that this was a success for deadCenter this year. I really love the addition of midnight movies. Heartbroken that I couldn't make it out. It was literally one of the things I was most excited about this year. But hope to see more of that from Mickey Reese next year. Chris, thanks for weighing in there. A couple other films I want to quickly shout out before we wrap up that we haven't talked about. Getting It Back, the Samande story. So I had the privilege of interviewing two of the members of Samande. But by the way, have any of the three of you ever heard of Samande?
Can't say I have.
I don't think so.
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay, neither did I. So here's the whole premise of the documentary. This is a band, a British sort of funk band from the 70s that...
Sorry, yes.
Well, this is perfect because the premise of the film is like this band was super influential in the 70s, really influenced a ton of the early sort of like hip hop movement before it was the hip hop movement. So it sort of influenced the influencers before people knew that's what they were, so to speak. And so
I didn't realize that's how their name was pronounced, which is why I was like, what?
Oh, no, yeah. Again, I had never heard of this band before, and I had to go out and research and watch the documentary to understand that I was saying it's not Simonade, which is how it looks. It's Samande, because they have roots in the Caribbean. So there's some heritage there. But anyway, I just want to call this out because I'm not going to lie. I'm 50-50 on music documentaries. I feel like a lot of times they get a little self-aggrandizing or formulaic, sort of in a certain way. Like think of like an inspirational sports film, but for music in a documentary. This film, though, I think what makes it so compelling is the history. One, probably most people of my generation, being millennials or Gen Z, probably haven't heard of Samande. The history in which they came up, so it was, again, very racially charged era around the world, but especially in the UK in the 70s. And you kind of just learn about where that sound came from, and you can hear through sort of the way they incorporate they edit the documentary, how the sound has evolved into bands that everyone knows about at this point in time. So again, just really compelling. And I would say it's thanks in large part to two things. One, they just have an incredible history. There's a lot of UK history I didn't know about. And they talk about the gentrification of the British neighborhoods, the London neighborhoods, I should say, and how, their sound was sort of influenced by those movements, but also really tremendous filmmaking from the director, Tim Mackenzie Smith. And you can check out the interview we have on the Cinematic Schematic. I sat down with the guitarist and the bassist, and then Tim Mackenzie Smith himself, talking a little bit about how they worked together on the film. And another thing was because there was basically no footage of them back in their heyday, hardly any. So they had to go to like impossible lengths to find footage to use in the documentary. And it really kind of underscores like, wow, it's really cool that they were able to do that. So just, tell this story via documentary. So I want to call that out. Again, great conversation we have up on the website. You can check that out.
I will add real fast. If you've seen the Spike Lee movie 25th Hour, you've heard Samande, because that's how I got turned on to them back in the day, was
nice.
The film 25th Hour. So yeah.
Very
if you've
cool.
seen that movie, you've probably unwittingly heard Samande.
It's no surprise to me that Spike Lee would use some Samande in soundtracks. Spot on. The other one I want to call out here is going to be the closing night film, Butterfly in the Sky, which is just a documentary about the making of Reading Rainbow, starring LeVar Burton. So again, I also did an interview on the podcast that you can check out there. But I will just say, personally, grew up, loved Reading Rainbow. It really ignited my imagination to what was possible through the books. Inspired me to start writing fiction as a very small child. I no longer write fiction, but what it did do was sort of inspire me to go pursue a literature degree, which inevitably leads me to content creation and marketing, which is what I do now. So I can't say enough nice things about the show Reading Rainbow and sort of how it was influential to myself, as well as I would say an entire generation of readers, most specifically millennials and maybe the younger Gen Xers. But tremendous documentary, kind of diving into, what inspired the program? Why is it powerful? Why does it resonate? Why do we still need that sort of programming and love for reading now today more than ever? And they had a really in-depth interview with LeVar Burton that's featured prominently in the documentary. So I highly encourage you to check that out if you're a fan of the Reading Rainbow, and maybe even if you're not, but you love reading books, it's worth your time because maybe you'll discover something new. So I want to call that out there. Last thing, just to reference an interview I did on the podcast, The Battle of Honey Springs. Yes, it was a documentary made about the Battle of Honey Springs here in Oklahoma. So I just want to call that. I had a really fun interview with the director, Brian Beasley. Essentially, they had been brought in to make a documentary to play in the museum, the Honey Springs Museum, which, again, I not from Oklahoma natively. I've been here for a long time, but I'm not as familiar with the history because I didn't go to primary education here. He was talking about how this Battle of Honey Springs apparently was like a very formative battle in Oklahoma when we was still a territory, and turned the tide of the Civil War in this part of the country. So anyway, learned a lot. Fun interview. Brian Beasley's a really nice guy. Really enjoyed my talk with him. You can check that out back over at thecinematropolis.com as well. Actually, last thing here, the Seeds of Greenwood. That's the so every year the Oklahoma City Thunder team usually has a new short film to premiere. This year it was the Seeds of Greenwood. I have to say I was really excited about this one coming off of last year's Pause the Game, where they actually talked about the at this point sort of like heard around the world when the Thunder game back in March of 2020 got canceled while people were in the arena. It was really that was one I was surprised by how much insight was garnered into the whole process of how did they decide to do it, why they decided to do it, what were the repercussions, and it really, in a lot of ways, was the moment that sort of signaled the beginning of the pandemic for people around the America. So that was last year, 2021's documentary. So going into this year, I was really excited about the Seeds of Greenwood, and what they're doing here is highlighting the Thunder Fellows program, which is a program put together, of course, by the Thunder, designed to enrich the education of African-American Black children in the Greenwood district. And this is enriching them in things like technology, entertainment, sports, athletics, STEM. It's sort of documenting, what the program's about. Definitely, I think it's got a really strong Thunder angle on it. But I think that the program itself is really exciting, and it was great to just kind of hear from the filmmaking team behind it. What went into the program and sort of what they're hoping to achieve with that. So that is the last one I will call out today. Before we start to wrap up, I wanted to give one final call here. Are there any other films or things you guys want to call out today before we wrap up the show?
I just have one, if you don't mind, kind of piggybacking off of Octopus, the film about the Beirut explosion. There was a short film. I made it to the Tearjerker shorts, but I believe this one was in the Pride shorts as well. And maybe I think there's another block called Big Hearted shorts, which I don't know entirely what distinguishes that one from Tearjerkers, but I believe this film made it out there, and it is Warshaw. It's directed by Dania Badir, and it stars Kansa, who is a male pop singer, but also a belly dancer. And it's about a young man named Mohammed. And I believe they're actually rebuilding Beirut as a result of the explosion. And he volunteers to operate one of the tallest cranes in Beirut. Not necessarily because he's braver than anyone else or stupid. It's just so he can have a moment to himself, so he can in turn be who he really is, which is a phenomenal singer and dancer. And you get to see that captured. And it's only like 14, 15 minutes long. But it has some just very, 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 very great cinematography. I believe Shadi Chaban, I do hope I'm not butchering their name, but that was the cinematographer. I actually spoke briefly with the Pride programmer, Laron Chapman, friend of the Cinematropolis, about the making of that film. And despite it being a short film, there are a lot of shots that, are like, like 50 stories up in the air and look terrifying. And and some of them were actually shot there on like rickety walkways. But again, a very moving film, not much dialogue at all, but one you should try and catch if you can see it anywhere. Yeah, again, that was Warshaw.
Just real fast, I wanted to say Raquel 1-1. It's amazing. And again, the less you know about it, the better. Just dive right in. But Raquel 1-1.
The premise for that, so we're going to go into not spoiling it per Chris's recommendation here, but I did read the synopsis on the deadCenter website, and it definitely piqued my interest for sure.
Yeah, it was quite good. I think it's probably my favorite of everything I've seen this year.
Awesome. High praise. Well, we'll have to make a note of that in the show notes as well, so listeners check that out. All right, everyone. Well, we are nearing the end of the show. I don't know. I just wanted to note here. It's kind of this last question is probably gonna be kind of tough since 3 of us didn't actually make it to the festival proper. But well, is there anything you guys would like to say about your favorite part about the festival experience, or what the festival means sort of to our community here before we wrap up? Daniel, I'll start with you since you were the one to go on site.
Yeah, so I already went a little bit about the in-person experience, but I so just to be on more of a personal level, I don't mean to be that guy, but there are some years where it's easier to appreciate some films more than others, and that's just the nature of it. You have a lot of filmmakers. Chris was alluding to this earlier that are there for the very first time. It's often a learning opportunity for both audiences, but new filmmakers themselves to see how their films are received. But really, this year, maybe just by sheer luck of the draw, it's very hard to think of something that didn't truly resonate with me. I'll probably say that The Braves may have been my favorite film overall, but it is very, very difficult to say that. Because it's a pretty contentious lineup that I got to enjoy, including the short films, including the tearjerker shorts. There's a lot of great options there, and I'm sure there were many more I didn't see. I know I didn't. Raquel 1-1, Mantis Club also sounds awesome, just from Joe's review alone. So I'd love to check that out. But again, I think that's just a testament to how much better this festival is getting in terms of programming. Continues to. Not that it wasn't great already, but it keeps getting better. So yeah, can't praise it enough, especially this year.
Yeah, the sheer volume of quality, I think, is really my biggest takeaway, having not have been there in person. And again, not saying anything about previous years, but it just everything felt so good, just like it was a really good year. And again, the variety too. I really loved the different kinds of voices, the different kinds of films that I saw across the board.
Awesome, Joe.
Yeah, I'll say that I've just, I think, become accustomed to the virtual film festival experience. I've done Sundance a couple of times virtually, South by virtually a couple of times now, and I'm really glad that deadCenter, at least at the time of this recording, we're going to have a abbreviated offering in 14 hours with a virtual festival. So I'm hoping that is something that continues to grow, because just based on this conversation, I see a couple of things here on the virtual festival page that I'm going to look at. Mama Bears is up there. A lot of the shorts blocks are there. So I'm hoping that continues to grow. I know that's like a major infrastructure ask, but if we could see like filmmakers being interviewed on there and maybe some live streams, I think that would be so incredible. So I hope that is something that continues to grow. I'm very excited about that.
Awesome. deadCenter, are you listening? You want more filmmaker interviews for bonus content on the virtual portal? I think they did a lot of that in 2020. You got my number. You got our numbers for that matter.
Yeah.
Give us a call. Joe, thank you so much for calling that out, because even though it was a fully in-person festival, they have kept up a small number of the films on the virtual festival portal, including some Oklahoma features, some short films, and some feature films. I know even the Seeds of Greenwood, for example, they're actually going to debut that up on the portal on Juneteenth. So again, it's going to be open for, I think, another week or so. I think the last thing I would say about that is it's really hard to see a ton of movies in person. So step back here, Joe, and Joe, you can chime in here as well, because you've covered several film festivals, both in person and physically. And as of all of us who have been doing this for deadCenter, it's when you're in person, it's hard to catch 10 films over the course of 3 to 4 days, right? Really hard.
Yeah,
And
impossible. You're exhausted.
exhausted. But whenever you can do it from home over 10 days, all of a sudden you're like, wow, I can you feel like you can adequately get a sampling of everything you want to see versus, things are really competitive for your time when you're there in person and where you can walk. And especially one of the cool things about deadCenter is that they use a ton of venues all over the city, but sort of the downside is it takes time to get there. So sometimes you have to like sort of make decisions about where you put your time. And I just want to shout out what you called out there, because I do think the virtual festival is a huge ad that was built during the pandemic out of necessity, that I think could still be continue to be a value add for all of us who want to go and be there with the filmmakers and want to have that in-person experience, but also just can't physically be everywhere all at one time.
And I will say too,
in the heat also.
Yeah.
Yeah, for real. I was only like outside for 40 minutes, and it just like I went into one film and then came out and it was like, 95 degrees. This is sweltering, but not swell.
I got to tell you, there was one time, there's an ice cream shop, I think, is it Marble Slab? One of those ice cream shops right around the corner from the Harkins. And one year, I think it was one of my first deadCenters, probably like 2014, 2015. I made the super duper boneheaded mistake of eating a giant ice cream cone, eating it in the cool ice cream shop, and then waiting in line for an hour. I was sick. So it is pretty intense. And that was also very poor decision making on my part. So yes, the heat is a factor.
Well, and you have people who, because one day we won't be under pandemic restrictions. It always seems like it's still really far away, and I know we're all very fatigued by it, but we will get there one day. But people with certain disabilities, other considerations that go into it. There's having a virtual component opens up so many doors for so many people, and it does allow you to actually see so much more. It's great to go and see a film in person for sure. And if you have the ability to do that, absolutely do it. But being able to couple that with the virtual component and be like, I heard about this film. I've missed all the screenings for it, but it's available for me to watch online. I'll go ahead and watch it. Which is exactly what I'm going to do and what we've all discussed doing. I think that's wonderful, and that definitely expands the audience that these films are going to get, which I think is the key. That's really the main point of having a film festival, is to get these films in front of eyes. And I would love for the virtual aspect or the online aspect to remain intact long into the future.
Daniel, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, just a second. Both Joe and Chris's comments, and Joe mentioning that it is a big infrastructure ask. And when I say, what I'm saying about like, well, the infrastructure is already there, it still might be difficult to make these things virtual, but we've kind of been forced to do that anyway. And so now, even as we, eventually do emerge from the pandemic and can safely do this kind of in-person stuff a bit more frequently, it's still, we don't need to lose that accessibility. I know I'm kind of going against what I said earlier about how it does make the films in some way like a weird, maybe it's almost a placebo effect that they feel more important when you see them in a theater. But seeing them is what matters. And for them to be seen, in fact. I hope we do not lose the virtual film festival. I would hope that even, more major film festivals would pick it up or do the same. I know cons is so, you can't possibly have a virtual film festival there, but like they really could. And maybe they do to some capacity. I don't know. But yeah, again, just reiterate that really accessibility is key here, and virtual festivals absolutely do that. And if you like some of the films we saw, especially again, like Mama Bears.
Yep, definitely. All right, I think we are about out of time here. Guys, I just want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your recording this on the Sunday, the last day of the festival. We'll be posting on Friday, so a few days later. I believe the virtual portal is still up for another couple of days. So if you have a badge, you can still access those there. But first, I just want to say thank you all again for giving up a weekend to write a lot of movies. You guys, everyone here pitched in hardcore within just a few days, turning around like 4 or 5 review essays, watching tons of movies. So I'm really just happy that you guys came back, and it's always a huge pleasure to work with each and every one of you guys at the festival every year. So Joe, I'll start with you. Firstly, thanks so much for joining this year, and where can people follow you and your work online?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Joe_Lightly, and you can read all my stuff on nofilmschool.com.
Awesome. Christopher, thank you for returning to us again this year. Where can people keep up with you and your work?
I'm not very active on social media much these days, but I have kind of been using Instagram quite a bit. So my handle there is kind of wonky, but if you search just my name, Christopher Schultz, you should find me. But the username is Agastus, like Augustus, but you're aghast, and it's funny.
Awesome. Very nice. And Daniel Bokemper, thank you for joining us again this year at deadCenter. Where can people keep up with you and your work online?
Yeah, check out, again, similar to Chris, not super active on social media, but you can find me on Twitter at Daniel Bokemper, also on Facebook. Just search Daniel Bokemper, or even just Bokemper, and you'll probably find me. But also check out my book reviews at worldliteraturettoday.org every once in a while, as well as my film reviews a little bit more frequently at the Cinematropolis.
Awesome. And of course, listeners, you can find me and all my work over at thecinematropolis.com, on Twitter, tweeting about things, films, video games, television, at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. And you can keep up with all the work we do at the Cinematropolis on social media, on Twitter at the Cinematrop, or on Facebook at facebook.com/the Cinematropolis. And if you've enjoyed our conversation today and you say, hey, I didn't get to catch that movie, or ooh, I want more in-depth thoughts on all the movies you talked about today, you can find all of our extensive deadCenter coverage over at thecinematropolis.com. We have nearly a dozen podcast interviews, along with even more written pieces from Joe, Daniel, and Chris. Thanks so much for joining us, listeners. We'll catch you again next time when we return to our normally scheduled programming with a review discussion covering Jurassic World Dominion.